Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, colleagues. We will be starting now. I hope you all have had nice lunches and enjoyed your lunch and some rest to start this afternoon session. But first, I would like to say that we're happy to have the presence of the subset chair. Paul, I don't know if you want to say a few words to the group, please.
Thank you, Milagros, and good afternoon to everyone. I will not keep you at all because you've got a very busy session ahead of you this afternoon. I'm sorry I wasn't able to be with you for the opening, but I know Aderito, the rapporteur of Substa, was able to be here. I can only stay for a short while this afternoon, but I'm very glad to see this first workshop under the Koronivia joint work get going well. I gather you were sort of carrying on, and maybe time is a big constraint you have today. I think commitment and engagement in the conversation, it's very clear that this workshop is useful, catching necessary things, and I'm sure that the follow-up to it also will allow you to go much further. So I wish you luck in the second part of this workshop today, and I look forward to hearing how this went and how you're going to move forward in the following workshops in the rest of the time up to 2020. There's a lot to be done, but it's so good to see this work getting going. We've had a long time where agriculture was one of these things we thought we should do something about. Now we're getting into the substance a lot more. How do we share understanding which will be relevant to us so we can act? Good luck, and back to you, Milagros, and thank you to you and Heikki for running this work.
Thank you, Paul, for your words and your support being here. Now let's get started, colleagues. I would like to open the afternoon session of our workshop, which will give parties the opportunity for general exchange of views, building on what we heard in the morning regarding the work of the constituted bodies. Before that, we would also like to hear from some parties and organizations around their experiences working with the constituted bodies on agriculture. So we will start first with Zambia. I would like to give the floor to Shula, that will present on how the work of the least developed countries expert group supported a project in Zambia. Shula, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. I will make a presentation about supporting Zambia to integrate the agriculture sector into the National Adaptation Plan project, focusing on the collaboration we've had with the LEG in developing the agriculture sector roadmap. Which one is that? Which one? Which one is that? Okay. Sorry about that. This is the presentation outline. I'll look at the project. Since it's a global program, then the project in Zambia, project outcome, key activities, and the work we did with the leg, and the output, agriculture sector roadmap. The NAP-AG, in short, is a global initiative funded by the German Federal Ministry for Environment, Nature, Conservation, Building, Nuclear Safety, through its International Climate Initiative. It supports a program which is targeting 11 countries, 4 in Africa, 4 in Southeast Asia, that's it, and some in Latin America. And it works in cooperation with FAO and UNDP. And in Zambia, the program is implemented through the Ministry of Agriculture. So in Zambia, the project focus, the objective is to identify and address climate change adaptation measures for the agriculture sectors in relevant national planning and budgeting processes through the formulation and implementation of a national adaptation plan. The project has 4 outcomes: technical capacity and institutions or NAPs strengthened, integrated roadmaps for NAPs developed, evidence-based results for NAPs improved, and advocacy and knowledge sharing on NAPs promoted. The project started in 2016 and will be ending June 2019 next year. So the key activities we've so far done include undertaking training courses to build capacity amongst planners and gender focal points in key ministries, research institutions, and the academia. Trainings have been undertaken in cost-benefit analysis for climate change adaptation policies and investments in agriculture, gender mainstreaming, and impact evaluation. We've also undertaken 2 studies, one in the capacity needs assessment for climate change adaptation planning in selected ministries and institutions, and done a comprehensive stocktake of the agriculture sector and climate change adaptation. We're also going to conduct 3 case studies. One on the cost-benefit analysis of the Conservation Agriculture Scaling Up project. Then we'll do an impact evaluation on a project dealing with weather and climate information, and another case study on mainstreaming gender in the Cashew Infrastructure Development Project, which is an adaptation project. We've also participated in various fora, advocacy sharing and knowledge sharing, participated in a MOOC, published articles of our work in local media as well as online on FAO and UNDP websites, and have formulated a draft communication strategy. So let me now turn to the work we've done in collaboration with the LEG. This work relates to the formulation of the agriculture sector roadmap for Zambia. We had an issue with how we were going to proceed. And so through contact with the NAP-AG global team, FAO and UNDP, we sought for support in facilitating the formulation of the agriculture sector NAP roadmap. Maybe a small update on where our NAP process has been. We had started the NAP process as a country as far back as 2014 with stakeholder consultative meetings, and the draft roadmap was formulated. But we had challenges. Our policy had not yet been formulated, and so there appeared to have been a problem with coordination, which was finally addressed by the policy, and the policy was only finalized in 2016. So between 2014 and 2016, we were more or less in limbo. But in that period, we had staff who participated in various trainings conducted by the leg. So upon formulation of the national policy on climate change, the process was reinitiated. So in late 2017, a stakeholder consultative workshop was undertaken where awareness was being created, and then we were targeting to initiate the process to formulate the readiness proposal so that we could access GCF funding. So when we asked the global team for support, they identified the Global Water Partnership, who was linked to the Global Support Program, which is under UNDP and with resources. And the Global Water Partnership were kind enough to assign Mr. Kidani Mariam Jembere, based in Global Water Partnership, South Africa. And he was supported by Ms. Juliet Teng from UNDP Bangkok, and Ms. Teresa Wong from FAO Rome. And we also got support from our UNFCCC national focal point, and from the Ministry of Agriculture, the Climate Smart Agriculture focal point. So in our interaction with Mr. Kidani, we developed a concept note on how we were going to approach this work. And through his guidance, we formulated those two objectives. But since we had resources, it was felt that we could also use the NAP-AG resources to continue the awareness creation. And so we arranged our meeting in two phases. The first part was an awareness creation meeting, and then followed that up with a dedicated workshop for formulating the agriculture sector NAP roadmap. So the one-day awareness meeting, the approach was to go through the leg guidelines so that those that participated in the meeting were enlightened on what they were about, how the process was going generally. And then we also used that opportunity to update the meeting on the national NAP process, and shared some work which had been done by the health sector NAP and our intentions on formulating the agriculture sector roadmap. I must say that we were encouraged by the participation from the media during that workshop, and who went ahead and published articles in the print and electronic media, and that to us was quite fulfilling, since we're more than meeting our objective of creating awareness on the NAP process. So after the stakeholder meeting, we then had a dedicated workshop where there were participants from the agriculture sector, and this was a 2-day meeting. Again, the facilitation by Kidani and those from Rome and FAO had presentations to set the context, and we had group work. Now, the leg helped us to contextualize the issues for the agriculture sector. They did a comprehensive analysis of where we are coming from, what policy instruments we had, and there was an exhaustive discussion on how did we see the agriculture sector NAP. Would it be a standalone, or it would fit into the national NAP process? Though at that point we were working on the agriculture sector NAP, the national NAP process though had stalled, but the understanding was that the sector NAPs could go ahead and be developed, but they need to feed into the overall NAP. So this is a logic framework which was used during that workshop to guide the discussions, the inputs, and to show the linkage between the work we were doing, the agriculture NAP, to the overall NAP, and to the 7th National Development Plan, which is an overarching development framework. That too is part of the logic framework to show the flow, and this was very helpful and helped guide the discussions and the output. This is part of the work which came out of the groups, and I must say during the initial work we had 3 themes. So we started with 3 themes. After the discussions, the group work, we ended up with 7. This is just a sample of one of the themes of the roadmap as it is today, showing the activities, the timeline, the responsible institution, and the financing mechanism, the ones to finance that activity. So these were the 7 themes we now have in our roadmap. This shows the next steps after we developed the roadmap. And I'm happy to report that the next steps, so far we are at number 8 to begin implementing the roadmap. Thank you for your attention. That's all I had to share.
Thank you, Shula, for your presentation. Colleagues, we will open the floor for some questions or comments that you have. I would also like to remember that we have 2 spots there for any observer organization that will also would like to make questions or comments. Okay, thank you, Shula, again for your presentation, for your clear presentation. I hope that you can accompany us a little bit more, so maybe there's some comments or questions after, further. Now we will go to the second presentation from the joint presentation from the World Food Program and the Adaptation Fund Board with Tanya and Miko. I understand that Miko will be going first. Please, you have the floor.
First one, this is my presentation. Thank you, Madam Co-Facilitator. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here to talk about the agriculture-related adaptation work that the Adaptation Fund is doing. I'm going to present first at the global level the work of the fund, and then hand over to Ms. Tanya Useho, who is representing the World Food Program, and is going to talk about a specific project that the World Food Program has implemented with Adaptation Fund support in Ecuador. Some of you may not be very familiar with the Adaptation Fund. The Adaptation Fund is a fund under the Kyoto Protocol that has mobilized so far about $750 million in resources that is meant for concrete adaptation projects. The initial source of revenue were the certified emission reductions from CDM projects, and those have yielded 200 million, and the rest, which is $540 million, has come from developed countries' contributions. The fund has so far allocated $532 million in 81 countries, of which 28 are least developed countries and 18 are small island developing states. We currently have 80 concrete localized adaptation and resilience projects in 63 vulnerable countries, with total almost 6 million direct beneficiaries and a larger number of indirect beneficiaries. The projects funded by the Adaptation Fund are effective and flexible, and most importantly, they're scalable so that they can be replicated by other resources. The projects cover all regions of the world. The orange dots on the map are concrete adaptation projects, and the blue ones are so-called readiness projects that help countries in accessing climate finance. There's quite a large pipeline of projects that have not yet been funded but have been so far considered by the Adaptation Fund Board, up to the tune of about $300 million. Agriculture represents a major part of the Adaptation Fund's portfolio. There are 13 projects that are classified as agriculture, representing over $80 million of funding. But there is also a category of food security, up to about $90 million. And there's quite a lot of overlap between these projects. When we are talking about food security, there usually are agriculture-related components there, also in projects on rural development and on some other sectors. The Adaptation Fund focuses its work on 3 different pillars: concrete, adaptation, action, support. That is the main pillar, but that is supported by innovation in adaptation and learning and knowledge management. These are the areas of our medium-term strategy. The World Food Programme project in Ecuador that Tanya is going to talk about in a moment actually started before this medium-term strategy was developed, but it embodies some of the same principles as the strategy. It's very concrete. It has improved water access for 3,700 and water consumption for 2,200 families, and almost 5,000 farmers implement sustainable agriculture practices. It's implementing new approaches, pioneering generation of information, visualizing vulnerability of communities, and it's doing great work. It's one of our flagship projects of developing new knowledge, and especially involving indigenous knowledge incorporated in local plans. There are also publications on the use of native plants and indigenous plants. It's also touching upon the vulnerability of people, and it has a very active participation of women in project implementation. Finally, I'd just like to mention, just to illustrate the diversity of our activities that we're funding in different parts of the world, 2 other projects. There is a project in Morocco that is implemented by one of our national implementing entities, which is the Agency for Agricultural Development of Morocco. And that is a great example where an ancient technology of water management systems called Ketara has been updated and modernized with Adaptation Fund funding, and that's a good example of the use of native technologies. Finally, our project in Mongolia is taking an ecosystem-based adaptation approach to maintaining water security in the arid areas of Mongolia. And for example, in an area where water resources are limited, and they are getting even more limited as the glaciers are disappearing, the government is taking innovative approaches to using the limited available water even more efficiently, and they've done excellent work, for example, related to greenhouse cultivation of strawberries and other value-adding crops in the local setting. So I will stop here and hand over to Tanya. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mikko, and thank you everybody for the opportunity to share our experiences in climate adaptation and community level through the implementation of this project funded by the Adaptation Fund. And I'm just waiting for the presentation. Or should I have to do something? Okay. Okay, thank you. So the project is about enhancing the resilience of communities to the adverse effects of climate change on food security in the Pichincha province and the Jubones River basins in Ecuador. As a general information, just to give you a brief overview of the project, implementing entity is the World Food Programme. We have the executing entities in charge of the Ministry of Environment of Ecuador, but we also have a governance structure of the project that is also implemented in coordination with the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock, the government of the province of Pichincha, and also the local governments of the Jubones River Basin. This is just to give you a quick overview where the project actually is located. Just to let you know, this is the first adaptation project implemented by WFP, and we are around 80 countries around the world actually. So we learn a lot from this experience from the Ecuador. This slide just summarizes a little bit the implementing a strategy that it was adopted by the project. So in brief, we base our intervention based on the latest, best available climate change information and food security information that we had in hand at that time. So using a community-based participatory approach and also ecosystem approach, and working together with the local governments and communities, we were able to identify the hazards, the vulnerabilities, link and translate this information into impacts on food security and nutrition at community level. So we were able to identify interventions, adaptation options that address problems or challenges in the short term, but also challenges in the long term, like negative coping strategies that are detrimental to food security and nutrition. One strong component that we have in this project is the gender equity. So because it was one of the main needs that it was identified in the project area as well, and also in coordination with the national priorities that we found in the ground as well. So it has the project a strong gender component. One key aspect that I would like to mention here is the type of, let's say, the flexibility of the funding. I would say in this case with the Adaptation Fund, allow us to implement a community-based approach with a high level of participation with the local governments and communities. And this helps us also to link scientific information with local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, in response to the national and local needs and priorities identified on this. So the flexibility of the funding was key in order to better work at community level and also to better respond to the national needs that were established in different, say, policy framework established in Ecuador. Here is just to give you a few examples of the type of intervention of activities that were implemented in the ground in Ecuador. The activities were aimed at to better prepare to deal with extreme weather events, focusing on droughts, protect health and nutrition of families, and promote gender equity. Moving a little bit about the impacts, we would just want to mention, for instance, that this is not a standalone project. The governance structure and the implementation of the activity was embedded into the national policies. I've just mentioned it here, just a few of them, like the National Climate Change Strategies of Ecuador, the National Development Plan, National Environmental Policy as well. We also work at community level developing, for instance, local adaptation plans at community level as well, and we enhance early warning systems also in the ground. So it was embedded, it was not, as I say before, a standalone project, but it was embedded within the policy framework and the programs that were established already in the country. Here is just to give you a quick glance about the impacts of the level, how many people we reach, for instance, the beneficiaries, communities, and the administrative level that we have over there. I'm not going through details on this because I know that the PowerPoint presentation will be uploaded later on. Just to emphasize here is that the activities were to promote or improve the quality of life, human health, reduce the vulnerability to weather shocks, and a critical element that we were working on, it was on water stress. So I have to say that impact evaluation, the final evaluation is going on, is being finalized. We hope that this evaluation will be available by all of you by maybe next year. I guess it will be uploaded in the Adaptation Fund website as well. So this is just a few examples of the type of, achievements, activities that we were implementing in terms of water management, prevention of food insecurity as well. As I said before, I'm not going through details because you will have access to this presentation. So a few key aspects and lessons learned that I would like to see and to highlight here is, first of all, we have an active participation of the indigenous women groups and also the local governments and other key stakeholders. As I said before, the governance structure that it was established for the implementation of the project, it really helps actually to define the different roles, to define a little bit the wave of intervention, the priorities, and to identify the key stakeholders that should be involved in the activities at the same time. So these are a few of the elements that were key in order to implement the project and have the impacts that we were aiming at. And finally, just a few aspects that I wanted to highlight here, maybe of the many that you will see here is just two of them. First of all, I would like to underline that these results could not be possible without the support of the Adaptation Fund and the institutional arrangements defined for the implementation of the project. The Adaptation Fund pushes, for instance, there's a requirement of having an inception workshop, to have a consultation process when you are developing the project proposals as well. Establish the work plan for the implementation of the project, but then you have to revise the work plan. So it helps us a lot, to have this consultation process at local level with the government in order to better identify the strategies, but also identify the definitions, the institutional arrangements, and the different roles that each of the stakeholders should play over them. And the flexibility of the funding is the other element I would like to highlight over here, because it allows us to implement innovative approaches, probably to WFP, that is more focused on food security and nutrition, but when we are talking about weather information, how to translate the information, and then we were working on climate services that were useful for, the needs of the final user of the information. So innovative approaches at community level with an active participation of local stakeholders working on this. So indigenous knowledge, scientific knowledge, and gender empowerment are probably the three key elements that we were implemented or highlighted in the results that we have so far. So my presentation ends here. You can have more information about the different, achievement of the project going to the website of WFP, and also I know that there's a lot of information also on the Adaptation Fund website. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tania and Miko, for your presentations. They were very helpful. As you have mentioned already, I think you tried to convey the message related to nature-based solutions and also the role of women, as well as the gender approach and how to include local and indigenous knowledge in this work. I don't know, colleagues, if you have some questions for this joint presentation as well as for the previous presentation. Any observer organization comments or questions? EU, please.
Thank you, Madam Co-Facilitator, and thank you for the interesting presentation. We would have a question, so how exactly do you link to your climate services to the farmers, so what they actually do on the ground and what they need? Is there a concrete link? And is there a time lag, for example, just to get an idea of what you're doing there? Thank you.
Okay. This one, I will say timeline and everything will depend on the context and what is in each country, because we are not doing just climate service in Ecuador, but some others, so we have more experience on that. We usually, what we do is we need to identify first the user needs, because it has to be tailored, the information. So we do an exercise together with the different, let's say, institute entities, governmental entities. We identify, in order to see how the system works and what is missing over there, but we also do a mapping at local level in order to understand the needs, to understand the market, also to understand the ways how can we deliver the information, what will be the best way to do it, what is more feasible, who can pay for the information, who cannot pay for it, for instance. So we have the services of mobile services over there, or maybe it's much better the community radio. So we are trying to do these assessments in order to identify what would be the best modalities for the translation. First of all, the user's needs, the best modalities, how to translate, and how the system will work. So the timeline, I mean, it depends on the country, as I said before, and the settings that are there. So there are some countries that maybe in less than 1 year, we set up, let's say, the first let's say, trial for the climate services, and then we are receiving feedback. For other countries, maybe it will take around 2 years. But it's not only about the farmer, I mean, for WFP, it's not about the, let's say, improvement of the agricultural outputs, but it's more about food security. So this component is also linked to capacity building. That is very, very important for us in order to understand the diets, what is feasible in the ground, and maybe if there's any chance to change a little bit the diets as well, because to improve the, let's say, the nutrition intake of our beneficiaries over there. So I would say between 1 to 2 years to set up the whole system, depending on the country and the context that you find over there.
Thank you. Uganda, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I just want to very much appreciate the presentations. And in light of our discussions this morning, I find it to be a very good examples of what is really happening and what is needed to really capture issues from the sector. I believe it's an opportunity to expose some of the issues and some of the challenges that are being the focus for programs that are addressing agriculture. And I want to say that what we recognize seriously is that we need to provide a clear focus on at the level where action can actually take place. And therefore, it's important that as we do our work in the various constituent bodies, we must recognize the specific conditions of the agriculture sector, where our clients are. And I think when you hear they're talking about rural women, they are talking about gender issues at that level, we would like all this to be actually included and also captured at the level of our efforts at the global level in the constituent bodies. We also feel that it is important to recognize the approaches that are being applied, the technologies that are being emphasized, the capacity building areas, the collaborations, the interministerial, these are national level elements. These are the elements that we need to really be supported in capacity building, in ensuring that these practices that will enhance, climate smart agriculture approaches are actually supported from the agriculture point of view. And therefore, what we are requesting is that we need this inclusiveness, we need this integration. And we think we need to discuss further how we can enhance this approach, because this is what will help us to address a bigger part of the population, to address a bigger part of the impacted population by climate change, and also to deal with the issues of how we can reduce the emissions from this sector. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Do you have any comments, colleagues? Okay, Peru.
Thank you, Madam Co-Facilitator. I have a question with regard to the funding. I would like to know if Ecuador could elaborate a little more on the flexible funding that was available for the project. Thanks.
What I was referring to is more about like how flexible it's not about the flexible of the funding, but it's about the the approach that we use for the implementation of the project, because maybe some funding are a little bit, more rigid, but some others, they say, okay, in the case of the Adaptation Fund, work at the community level because we were interested on that. Do a little bit of innovation, so we propose a little bit about what we could be doing in the ground, the type of assessments, vulnerability assessments that we were doing also. So we didn't have, let's say, so many constraints, so we were able to a little bit, I would say, because it was our first project, to test a few tools that we didn't have defined, but it helped us actually for the implementation on a later stage of the project as well. So we are not talking about how flexible the funding it is. I'm talking about more about the approach in order to implement the activities in the grounds. Thanks for the question.
Okay, thanks again for the three presenters. We invite you to continue with us in case your schedule allows. I would like to present the next presentation, and also I would like to highlight that as we speak here, we're making some changes in the agenda that was posted earlier by the Secretariat due to the availability of the colleagues that are coming. So in case you see some changes in the agenda, it's because of that. So I would like to present our next presenter. It is Caterina from the CTCN. Could you, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present our partnership with the government of Vietnam. I'm Katerina Barunica, and I'm here as part of the CTCN Secretariat. Our Vietnamese counterpart unfortunately couldn't be here today, so I will present part of the presentation that was delivered to our advisory board meeting in March of this year. Let us just be clear that CTCN does recognize that this information would be much better if it was indeed shared by the national representative. However, considering this important opportunity to input into this process, we wanted to share this particular experience with you. We also believe that this is a good project-based example as it addresses mitigation opportunities in a sector with a large potential for replication, particularly in Southeast Asia. With that, I will begin the presentation and walk you through the project. So the next one. As you heard earlier this afternoon by our CTCN Advisory Board Chair, the principle of CTCN is provision of technical assistance. This process largely depends on a national designated entities, which are country focal points for climate technology, and they function as gatekeepers to ensure that requests are aligned with national circumstances of a country. These focal points are generally sitting in the Ministry of Energy, Natural Resources, or Environment, as it is the case in Vietnam. So if we look into Vietnam case, a technology needs assessment was carried out to identify both adaptation and mitigation needs for Vietnam. On mitigation side, energy, agriculture, and land use change, and forestry were highlighted based on their share of greenhouse gas emissions, potential for GHG emission reduction, capacity to employ mitigation technologies, and contribution to Vietnamese national development goals. Therefore, the project will be looking into one of the areas which were identified as being the highest potential ones. Good. Let's move to the next slide. So TNA for adaptation also identified agriculture as a sector of interest for Vietnam, along with land use change, and forestry, coastal zone management, and water resources due to significance to Vietnamese economy, role in local culture, importance to the labor market, and vulnerability to the climate change. The technologies identified for those sectors are also considered to be appropriate to national circumstances and with high adaptive potential. So Vietnam depends on coal as main energy source, which comes either from the north of the country or has to be imported to meet the future demand. Alternatively, locally produced fuel sources could increase energy self-sufficiency and foster development of a local energy sector. Rice husk represents an enormous potential in terms of organic material to be used as an energy source. With that, an estimated production of 44 million tons of paddy rice in 2013, approximately 7 million tons of rice husk are available in terms of potentially usable biomass. So the Vietnamese Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development has established targets for the sector. One of the targets are that the rice millers must reach at least 50% of on-site paddy drying by 2020, meaning that there is a pressure to invest new rice husk dryers. This approach would open a win-win solution. Rice millers would benefit from a high quality of export rice, while farmers would benefit from support from their rice miller value chain partners in form of fertilizers, logistics, and funding opportunities. Based on the baseline that we established for the country, the CTCN was requested to develop a business plan and identify support for informed decision-making and investment in selected enterprises. This included the scaling up of resource-efficient and cleaner production improvements by demonstrating and promoting measures within other enterprises in the sector. 2 firms were identified for the piloting of this approach, Song Hao and Ao Giang Food. So let us zoom in one of the firms. The selected firm, one of the 2 was Song Hao Food Company, that has 3 processing factories with total capacity of 200,000 tons per year, which is made out of 90% brown rice and 10% fresh paddy. According to the plan, the company will invest into a system of rice husk-based dryer to ensure at least 50% of paddy dried by themselves by 2020. So with that in mind, the technical assistance that was implemented by CTCN has identified 4 major activities. So if we look into the screen, we will see the activities. So let me just quickly walk you through it. Under the first activity, we have developed a decision tool or guidelines in selection of suitable technology and business models. This tool or guideline includes technical, social, and sustainable indicators. Under the second activity, we have identified analysis of potential business model, on-site, off-site, and alternative, followed by third activity of using the tool and guidelines to perform feasibility of potential sector model at selected enterprise. And finally, the fourth activity was overview of access to financing options. So on the last slide that I have, you will find further details of this particular technical assistance, such as duration, which is 12 months. So as you have learned today in the morning, CTCN does very targeted, very fast technical assistance, as well as you will see here the expected benefits of this particular project, including the effective valorization of rice costs in 2 enterprises, as well as the greenhouse gas emissions reduction for the 2 enterprises. And further on, one of the other anticipated results will be higher potential for the scale up for rice sectors and other sectors related to the energy demand. I think with this overview of the project, I will close my presentation and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Katerina. Colleagues, are there any questions or comments from this presentation? Sudan?
Okay, thank you very much for this informative presentation, which is very effective economically and environmentally and socially. Just I would like to ask a very technical question about the alternative use of the crop residues in the improvement of the soil chemical, physical, and biological properties, and then the increase of the production. So I would like to have something about if you have accompanied the other alternatives and the benefits which are going to be removed by the use of the debris of this crop as a source of energy, so that you are going to prevent the soil from having the biological benefits by the residues, fermentation of the residues of the crop, which is very important to have an organic product. Thank you very much.
Thailand, please.
Thank you very much, co-facilitator. Since this morning we heard about the SCF, TEC, CTCN, and PCCV, and we heard some good examples on the ground that is happening right now. So my point is, since we are talking about the modes of implementation of this Koronivia joint work on agriculture, how would you, what we are really trying to have is kind of a program that we could merge together and link together, how we would work together, in my understanding. And so how would you link this with the national programs, and be it as a regional programs, and how would these national programs on the ground be captured under this Koronivia joint work action on agriculture? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thailand. Definitely that is an important question, and I think that we will have the time after the end of the presentations to include that. But if Katerina, if you have any comment on that, we will definitely be interested in hearing you. I would have another question from Kenya, and then we can give the floor to Katerina. Thank you, Kenya.
Thank you, co-facilitator. Thanks, CTCN, on behalf of Vietnam, for that very good presentation. We know that CTCN doesn't have money. Who's funding this project? And your key role is to facilitate, for example, technology, appropriate technology and the rest. What do you see as the key innovation in which you can say CTCN has brought into this, to the extent that it can be scaled out to other countries? Because that's important. We want to see the role of CTCN working with the other countries.
Thank you, Kenya. Please, Katerina, could you...
Maybe let me first address the question coming from Thailand regarding the coordination with different initiatives. As I started with my implementation, the CTCN works based on the request coming from the national designated entity. So this is the person that is embedded within the relevant national ministry, and that is coordinating with different ministries. Also, before we start with our technical assistance, we do the groundwork, we do the baseline, we do list out the other initiatives based on which the project will build up rather than replicate. And this is done in close coordination with NDE, who is our national, like I said, gatekeeper, and ensures that whatever we are doing makes relevance to the national context. That is when it comes to coordinating at the national level. Let me address then the question from Kenya asking regarding the funding source. I understand that you are very aware with the CTCN modalities of operation, that CTCN is funded by different donor countries and multilateral organizations such as GEF and GCF. The funding is distributed then on a priority and demand basis, jointly with the agreement with different countries, as well as the CTCN Secretariat and Director. So therefore, the funding is distributed to different countries with the prioritization scoring process. Regarding the key innovation that we introduce and whether this can be replicated, I think what we do with CTCN is, I would not say that we implement technologies that are not market ready. We implement technologies which are market ready within the national context. So there is an adaptation of technology, and based on lessons learned, there is always an opportunity to replicate within countries of similar setup. So that would be when it comes to innovation. And the question from Sudan regarding the alternative sources and various technical specific question, I will have to refer to you to one of the technical officers who is following this project, so you can discuss technical details.
Thank you, Katerina. We will go now to our last presentation from FAO. Marcial, you have the floor. Thank you.
Okay. May I have the pointer? The remote? Thank you. And thank you, Madam Co-Facilitator, to giving FAO the opportunity to present some experiences in working with constituted bodies. So first of all, let me start with, and I will go straight forward to the point, the FAO mandate is still to fight and to end hunger and to work on food security. But in that overarching agenda, we are FAO member country asked us to work more closely with the climate change agenda. So they asked us to develop an FAO strategy on climate change, focusing on supporting country toward adapting smallholder production and making the livelihood of rural population more resilient. This is all in all those documents, and you can see the link here, and I guess the Secretariat will provide after the presentation to all. Then saying that, for us, Koronivia is really the best opportunity today that will facilitate concrete progress on the fundamental priority of safeguarding food security and ending hunger, and the particular vulnerabilities of food production system to the adverse impact of climate change, and you recognize here the preamble of the Paris Agreement. But also, agriculture and food system are also a fundamental part of the solution to tackle climate change, and is uniquely placed to help countries to develop, also to work on the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. So we're also seeing here an opportunity to link with SDGs. Saying that, so FAO is following all the international negotiation with a component on agriculture, and we are engaged in providing to all member countries with a relevant background and knowledge. So here you have 3 examples. So we are trying to understand what are the propositions of the different parties to work in the Koronivia, We are looking also on the different portfolio of funding available and to look where agriculture is in those portfolio. And also we were trying to understand what are the different bodies and how they can help in the process. So we developed some publication to support our member countries that are the same countries that are here present in the UNFCCC. On the conclusion of our last publication, Koronivia joint work, I have some exemplars here, is that agriculture is hopefully inherent in the work of the UNFCCC, and each of the subsidiary and constituted bodies has worked either directly or indirectly on issues related to agriculture. And we have seen good example this morning and this afternoon in the past, and could do so again in the future, and probably with an increased ambition. And then FAO used to work with UNFCCC Secretariat since long, but we decided then to increase and enhance on our collaboration. And it is now stated in a memorandum of understanding that was signed in 2017. And here you have some example that what you can find in that memorandum of understanding, working on policy advice, data sharing, knowledge access, targeting agricultural smallholders always, capacity building, sharing of technical expertise, and develop some product for knowledge sharing, for instance, e-learning for national greenhouse gas inventory, and we have other e-learning that are freely available online for all stakeholders. Now, I will give you some example of some experiences, and really it's non-exhaustive. So here you are representing different stakeholders, different countries, but it's really just some example to show you how we can work with different constituted bodies. So first, on the technology mechanism, so the tech on the CTCN, I will not pronounce the full name you have here. So our objective is policies and action to accelerate the development, transfer of low emission and climate resilient technologies. And here you have the vision, technologies for adaptation, mitigation, and food security in the agriculture sector through source cooperation. And we are forcing a greater integration of National Adaptation Plan, NAP, nationally determined contribution, NDC, and technology needs assessment linked to finance through the different funds, Standing Committee of Finance, GEF, GCF, Adaptation Fund, etc. So an example how we work with tech on the CTCN, for instance, FAO provide technical support, and it was the case concretely the Substar 46 in May 2017. For both stem mitigation, the example showed here in the slide, and also on the stem adaptation. So we provided background presentation, we contributed to the debate, contributing with the last updated information on mitigation adaptation for agriculture. So a concrete example here. Another example with the CGE, so you have the full name again. So assisting countries improving their national communication and biennial update report, BUR, focusing on the agriculture and LULUCF sector. And as a result, we have some tools, training material, and capacity building workshop in regional one or national one. Here you have some countries, but the etc. perhaps is the more important. We are really acting in different countries. On an example that was also mentioned a little bit this morning, a regional hands-on training workshop on identifying and reporting adaptation actions in national communication. There were 3 CGE on workshop, one in Togo for Africa, one in for Latin America it was in Paraguay, and for Asia Pacific and Eastern Europe it was in Nepal. And you have here the link to the full report that showcase what was achieved during those 3 workshops. An example here with the least developed country expert group. So here our objective is supporting LDCs, integrating agriculture-related climate change risk and opportunities into national adaptation plans. So FAO is part of LEG meetings and advisory board for NAP Expo, for instance. We are member of UNFCCC Technical Working Group on NAP, And we are providing guidelines on training and capacity building, including gender, cost-benefit analysis, measurement and evaluation, impact evaluation in relation to NAP. On some example here, you have an extract from the report of the last meeting of the leg. You have the link below, stating, for instance, that FAO supports 7 global and regional programs and 10 national programs covering 10 LDCs on 22 developing countries in Africa, Asia, Europe, and Latin America and the Caribbean, on activities related to the process to formulate and mostly implement NAPs. On the right side, you have the supplementary guideline that was produced by FAO. The last one on specificity of agriculture, fisheries, and forestry in 2017, on 3 years ago, on genetic diversity. And lastly, an example with the Standing Committee on Finance. So to ensure the right, here objective is to ensure the right integration of agriculture sectors in finance mechanism. And a result, the importance of agriculture sector for climate change mitigation and adaptation needs really to be reflected in financing decision and guidance provided by SCF. And here an example, so it's not agriculture sensus stricto as it is here in that community, it's mostly in forestry, but forestry is part of the agriculture sector as a FAO mandate. And FAO was supporting the 2015 forum of the SCF. It was specifically on the forest, on people investing in sustainable, for a sustainable future. And here you had a presentation made by FAO, and FAO was really trying to conduct that two-day event attended by more than 180 people. And we did on forest, we might one day do a similar support with the SCF as if requested on other sectors of agriculture, livestock, aquaculture, cropland, whatever. So those few non-exhaustive, once again, examples show that FAO is already directly or indirectly engaged with working with the convention bodies. But not only, we are working in the context of the UNFCCC with all stakeholders concerned by the agriculture sector. And here you have some examples, non-exhaustive. So we are working, implementing as an implementing partner of the NDC partnership, supporting country, developing country, co-facilitation of the thematic working group on agriculture, food security, and land use under the umbrella of the NDC partnership. We are developing a climate and land hub to provide relevant information to all member countries. We are implementing several capacity building initiatives on transparency, CBIT. This is a GEF fund that was adopted in the COP21 with the GEFs. Supporting the mitigation data and analysis program of the UNFCCC Secretariat, on helping countries to access climate and environmental finance with GEF, GCF, NAMA facility, all the different kind of funds. And here there is a lot of stakeholders that have not their logo, but we are working with the CG, the CCAF, Climate Change Agriculture Food Security Program of the CG centers, International Research Center, with the FTA also program, with a lot, let's see, with the Global Research Alliance on Agriculture Greenhouse Gas, with CMCC. So for the one of the publication analysis, the Koronivia submission was with that center, with UNEP, UNDP, the other Rome-based agency, World Food Program, and IFAD. So we are really engaged in supporting the overall UNFCCC process with all our partnership we already have. On our vision for the future of Koronivia, that we think that transformation of agriculture requires long-term approach. It's not only up to 2020, so we need perhaps also to think beyond 2020. We need to raise ambition on generating political will to scale up the process. We need also to be able to measure the progress toward the goals that we will have to set, also in light of limited financial resources. So we need to prioritize allocation. And just to end, FAO is really eager to support the advancement of Koronivia joint work on agriculture and offer the relevant technical ground for addressing key elements on meeting implementation challenges. So we are at your service, basically. So many thanks. And we have your website where you can find all the publication material supporting you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcial, for your interesting presentation. And as you mentioned, those few non-exhaustive examples of the work FAO is doing with the constituted bodies. I would like to ask colleagues if you have any questions related to this last presentation. Kenya, please.
Thank you, co-facilitator. Thanks, FAO, for a very good presentation, and we do appreciate the documentation and support that you provide to the process. I have a few questions which I thought would like you to help us to understand. The first one is, when you look at the 5 workshops that we went through, FAO being the specialized body, the UN specialized body on agriculture, how do you see your role in helping and working with the countries to implement some of those outcomes, and also the current ones which are in the Koronivia? And I know you have made reference to that. We need to think beyond 2020 and any future topics that may come after 2020. So I'm just trying to see, how do you see FAO positioning itself in helping countries to realize some of the outcomes that are emerging from the agriculture in the negotiations? And more specifically, if, for example, is FAO, you have said you have a knowledge hub. In the outcomes of the workshops we had, one of the things that was emerging was knowledge sharing, platform, learning, and the rest. So what's the synergy, and how do you see you working with UNFCCC to realize that need? Second, FAO, you don't only work on agriculture within UNFCCC, but you work outside UNFCCC because you are the UN specialized body for agriculture. So the question I would ask would be, to what extent have you tried to find a synergy between the processes that are going on within the UNFCCC and outside the UNFCCC? Because within UNFCCC, we are only dealing with that element of climate change with agriculture. A large part of agriculture is outside the UNFCCC. So how do you help us to find that synergy so that we can avoid the conflicts that arise? And finally, there is this dichotomy that appears where we say agriculture is a source of problem, climate change, but also a solution. So that dichotomy is very clear. But when we come to implementation, when you look at agriculture, you say you are going through adaptation. But in reality, some of the activities you are doing in adaptation have a co-benefit in terms of mitigation because they are sequestering carbon or they are doing something. And you don't account for that particular co-benefit. And you don't want it to be listed as something that is emerging which the country should take pride of, because by virtue of the adaptation intervention, it is also contributed to the public good of carbon sequestration. So how do we, as a technical institution, how do we find that synergy that will also be beneficial to the UNFCCC, in the sense that we know that we may, for example, in Africa, our emphasis is in adaptation, but we know that as we do adaptation actions in agriculture, we are also contributing to the global emission reduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenya. Any other question? Please, Marcel, could you answer the questions proposed by Kenya? Thank you.
How long I have to answer? So I will try to provide some element of answer, and then we can discuss further. So how we are supporting the process and supporting the implementation, the outcome of the 5 workshops. This is all day-to-day activities. We are supporting countries answering requests. And basically how it works, a country reach our office in a country, they exchange and they explain if they have a problem to set an early warning system. So we try to develop with the country the adequate response. On the workshop specifically, we realized that it was really well presented this morning by the Secretariat on the main, let's say, commonalities on the 5 workshops. There were a lot of exchange, sharing, information, knowledge. So this is also the role of FAO to trying to put different countries when they have similar context to find a solution and to look at a solution that works well in the country, why not to try in a country with a similar context. So this is a way to address that question. So basically developing projects to support a country. Just to give you an example, we are working with Jeff, Global Environmental Facility. Today the portfolio of FAO is about 700 million. So you can see it's a lot of portfolio, not only on climate change. I will go back to you because it's another question. On the GCF, this is really focusing climate change. We have 2 medium-sized projects in the GCF terminology, and we have also 10 readiness projects on targeting adaptation. So we're making use of the available funds to support agriculture. On the knowledge hub, we really need to implement that knowledge hub because it's part of our core mandate of FAO to provide information, relevant information to our country member. So we decided to implement a hub targeting all that is agriculture-related sector when it deals with climate. But we will not. We do not want to replace all the hub, but we need to link and to provide a one-stop shop where you can find all and to be redirected eventually with to other. You have the World Bank data information, you have WFP, you have other partners that have also collecting information. So we will not put all the information in that hub, but we will put the relevant doors. The people that will reach that hub, they will ask a question and will say, we will try to answer, look, based on your demand, you should go there, and we have also some document that can support you. So it's really one-stop shop. On the work outside the UNFCCC on building synergies, I am the Climate Environment Division, but I have a sister division that is Land and Water, that is mostly supporting the UNCCD process, and we are working really together. For instance, when you reach the GEF, you can build a project that is cross-cutting. So touching upon land degradation, certification, also biodiversity. So we try to address what is the most relevant for the country. So this is what we are doing. We are really promoting an holistic approach because we are serving first the farmer. And the farmer cannot have different agenda. He cannot have, you know what I will say, cannot have one day on mitigation, one day on adaptation, one day on biodiversity, one day on land degradation. And he wants just a solution to support him, to help him to have a decent job, revenue for his or her family. And that's it. And then after, he can support the different global agenda. So this is really our approach. And I noted your sentence, agriculture is a social problem, climate change a solution. We need to reverse. Agriculture is a solution. And climate change is a problem for the farmer. So this is really the way we need to think. So I guess all of us together, we need to find the best solution for climate change, not only climate change, land degradation. Land degradation is also exacerbated by climate change, biodiversity loss, so it's all interlinked. So this is some element of answer. I have some colleagues in the room. My deputy director is there, so if I answer not nicely, he will say to me, he will compliment, so that's it. Compliment?
Okay, well, thank you very much for the question. I just want to add one point on the synergy in particular that you highlighted, because it's very pertinent. The issue of food safety and agriculture obviously is not only addressed within this context of climate change, but is much wider than that. What I wanted to highlight on your question on how we're addressing this issue both within the UNFCCC and outside. So there are a number of other activities happening outside, and I want to highlight in particular the Committee on Food Security, which brings in all countries from all around the world, but also experts on food security. And we had the meeting of the committee back at the headquarters in Rome last month. And obviously the issue of agriculture and climate change and the synergy between the UNFCCC work and the Committee on Food Security was very much addressed. And we also addressed that through a specific side event that we had between the UNFCCC and FAO, and I'm very pleased that the UNFCCC were presented here by the colleague Ms. Hollins from the Secretariat. So that issue was very specific. So the point I want to make is that that issue you highlighted of synergy is absolutely critical, and we're addressing that through a number of initiatives. The other one is through the Committee on Agriculture that is also looking at this issue of climate change and synergy. And the last point I want to make is with regard to the climate summit that is organized by the UN Secretary General that is going to take place in September next year. And that's also addressing the issue of agriculture and food security under the banner of nature-based solutions. So I hope this helps to add to the points that my colleague Martial made. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, if there are no any other questions for the panelists, this is your last chance to make those questions. If not, we will continue with our discussions. No further questions? Okay, so now we would like to thank the panelists with a warm applause. Thank you very much for your time and for coming here. We invite the panelists to continue with us in case your schedule allows. If not, now colleagues, it's time to hear from one another, to share our views and ideas. We've had a lot of the presentations during this, until now that it's, what time is it? 4:40, but now we have, I hope, enough time to discuss and share ideas and hear from each other based on the presentations we've had. For that, the Secretariat has prepared 3 questions, but first we want to focus on the first 2. How could the constituted bodies be further involved, and which modalities would be useful? We are putting these guiding questions on the screen for you to consider when answering these questions. Please, let's focus on the dialogue and the discussion to allow also speaking time for as many participants as possible. We would like to try to avoid any statements. So the idea is to open up this discussion and have an open discussion. Also, the idea is in some moment that we can also have observer organizations share their views and ideas too. We would really like to hear your concrete ideas and direct reactions on the way forward. So now I would like to open the floor for your views and ideas. Okay, we start with Tunisia, followed by the EU.
Thank you, Chair. As my first, I take the floor the first time, so it's an honor for me to be an active member of Koronivia. On behalf of African Group, as a lead coordinator, we have a proposal, a compilation of submissions already made by parties, UN agencies, and NGOs may be useful. Bilateral consultations, meeting with the constituent bodies to discuss how to integrate implementation of the outcomes of the 5 workshops in their work plans and programs. And a COP decision may be needed to encourage constituted body to integrate the outcomes of the 5 in-session workshops into their programs and strategies. Thanks.
Thanks, Tunisia. EU?
Thank you, Madam Co-Facilitator. Maybe we would propose something, well, bake some smaller breads and say the first thing to do is to somehow institutionalize involvement of the constituted bodies with our work. So maybe regularly invite them when we have sessions. Maybe they are not always available, but just to keep the communication going. As we've seen today, it's also for the constituted bodies actually quite interesting to get this kind of feedback. By itself, this might already start the flow of information which would lead to action and to an improvement of implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, EU. Colleagues, if you could come closer to the microphone because it's a big room and I think the echo is not, and the noise is not helping us. Brazil, followed by Uruguay.
Thank you, facilitator. I think I think in the Brazil perspective, it's become clear from this very useful workshop that we had today. There's so much synergy and so much that we can share, and so much of work that is already being undertaken by bodies under the convention. I think it has been a very pleasant and fruitful evening and morning in terms of sharing information. But I suppose we can, in this spirit, put ourselves into service for those bodies as well. So strengthening our linkages and yeah, well, becoming more available to work with them in a very open and truthful manner is also a very important way for us to move forward. So I really think that into this work, it will be very important if we can give them a message that they can rely on us and maybe put us more into the work that they are doing there, so that we can also help the agriculture being implemented under the mandates that they already have. I think it was clear for us that they have a cross-cutting mandate. They are not thematic. So we are working agriculture, but I think it's up for us to go there and be more available and understanding, so how we can cooperate and make ourselves more useful. So maybe that if we can use this process as some kind of fluid that could conduct this in terms of creating this kind of interlinkages, that I think that might be very useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I'm going to correct myself on the list. Ana, ¿sí? Okay, Uruguay.
Thank you very much. So in line with what Brazil just said, and regarding the first question, Uruguay think that it is key to establish a two-way road between Koronivia and the constituted bodies, and that very strong communications between Koronivia and the constituted bodies are essential. Koronivia should provide inputs and guidance through the COP to the CBs, and the CBs should inform on the gaps and needs of scientific and technological work, let's say the SABSTA side of Koronivia, and on the needs for implementation arrangements and legal issues, that is the SBI side. So one of the several options for accomplishing this that I just said is to ensure the participation of the CBs in the technical expert meetings of Koronivia, to facilitate direct access to information to the CBs, and to strengthen the dialogue between Koronivia and the CBs. We consider that CBs are the closer bodies of the Convention to the parties' implementation needs. So they need to be aware of the unique features of agriculture and how these can be addressed to fulfill these implementation needs in agriculture. Moreover, CBs are the link between discussions under Koronivia and parties' concrete requests, and that is why they have an essential role. And I don't know if the idea is to focus on the first question and then we're going to the second one, right? No? Okay. So regarding the second question, that it's specifically related to the modalities, Uruguay thinks that in a general perspective, modalities for implementation under Koronivia should be agile and efficient, and that they should ensure rapid answer to countries' needs with the corresponding MRV mechanism. And in particular, we consider that three modalities would be helpful. First, Koronivia should provide guidelines to the CBs through a COP decision on which particular elements should be taken into consideration when promoting actions in agriculture. Second, we consider that it would be very important to establish a platform under the control of parties for exchanging information and knowledge and for showcasing. And third and least, is to map what the CBs are doing in relation to technology transfer, capacity building, and finance on the topics of the 5 in-session workshops. And in particular, this initial workshop has been very useful for these points. And this gives us signals of the gaps and provide us guidance to enhance action by the CBs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Uruguay. And just to remind parties, we are, yes, trying to discuss both questions 1 and 2 in this first round of discussion. Kenya, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very useful inputs. Before I go to the 3 questions, I'm just curious to know why we didn't get any presentation from GCF. Is it because it's not a constituted body under the convention, or my understanding is it has no role in Koronivia? I think it will be very useful. If not, then we will need GCF to talk to us. If not, then we would like to have a decision to invite GCF to come and talk to us. I think it's important as Kenya. We would like to have GCF come and present to us, and we need to ask them questions. Regarding the guiding questions that you've provided, one, I think it was very useful. I must admit, it was very useful to hear from the constituted bodies on what they are doing and what programs they have. But unfortunately, many of them did not respond to the question as to what are they going to do with the outcomes of the 5 workshops, and whether they have had an opportunity to look at the other 5 topics that we have under Koronivia. What they were responding is they may look at the future, and that is fine. But I think the question we have is we already have specific topics now which we needed them to respond and to tell us to what extent they have been able to, or they can be able to help us to advance that piece of work. So having said that, then that means that, one, it will be useful for us when we are considering the report, that we may need to crystallize those issues that Dick did present in the morning as outcomes, and the parties can further refine them based on their submissions, and say, is there a need to direct some of those specific elements to the relevant constituted bodies to be able to consider, whether in their current work plan, or if not, in their future work plan, but there must be some framework. Otherwise, it will become difficult. And the other point I think I would like the constituted bodies to look at is this. When we are talking about implementation, as Kenya, we're not looking at workshops alone. So, because we're already doing workshops here. So when we're talking about implementation, yes, workshops may be relevant at a lower level or whatever, but they must be accompanied by something. Otherwise, just workshops again, I don't think the constituted bodies will be responding to our quest for implementation. So as Kenya, and I believe with working with other colleagues from Africa, we'll be able to look at the 5 workshops, and we identify those critical issues that we think are relevant for each of the constituted bodies, and we will be putting forward an approach that we think the constituted bodies would need to work with parties in order to move that, and also to work with parties in respect to those topics now, from methods all the way to socioeconomic that are already in Koronivia. Second one is in terms of question 2, as Africa, Tunisia on behalf of Africa and Uruguay. And I hope Uruguay, you are talking on behalf of G77. Is that correct? Assuming that you are, then we want to align our submission with those in the sense that, and I think it came out from the presentations from the considered bodies, that some of them already have work plans, and for them to consider, it means something must come from the COP, because they have to receive instructions from the COP. Now, the instructions from the COP is not directing them to do that. It may be encouraging, and we know how to frame that, so that if they, for example, the boards of tech and whatever, the executive committee and the rest, they can now consider that and see how they can implement. So we should not be worried about a COP decision going to this, encouraging this considered body, because we have done many of those kind of decisions. And we think the only way, and even as EU did indicate, and as Brazil has indicated, for us to continue and strengthen the engagement, then it means there must be some direction from the COP, because that's the policy organ. And I think a COP decision can be couched very well to enable us to do that. Now, in terms of question 3, I think the challenge we have right now is this. Yes, I'm finishing, but I think I'm allowed to talk because I'm presenting Kenya view, and that's why we are here. So please don't allow me to speak to the points that I want to speak. Now, in respect to the future topics, I think that's why we put this topic on modalities as number 1, because it's the one to determine whether, in fact, we're going to have other topics. Because if it's just going to be talking shop, then we don't need it. And therefore, we must resolve the issue of modalities of implementation. Then we can now decide as to whether we need other future topics. And so I will reserve our comments on question 3 until that time we make a determination on the modalities. Then we'll see whether, in fact, we need other topics for talking. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kenya. I would like to address the questions you asked at the beginning of your intervention. So for the first question, I would like to give the floor to Dirk so he can explain the question related to the GCF. And also, I understand that GCF is here somewhere. So after after Thailand takes the floor, maybe the GCF can give us some comments so that if any other party has also a question for the GCF, they can make it after that, after their intervention. So please, Dirk, could you explain a little bit more or address the question proposed by Kenya? Thank you.
Well, just briefly, the invitation list or the presenters were agreed upon by the Subster and SBI chair, and we realized that we have a very, very long list of presentations already when we have the constituted bodies only. So we cut it off after the constituted bodies and experiences working with the constituted bodies. And that excluded, for example, the Green Climate Fund, because they're not a constituted body under the convention.
Is this a backup question, another question, or a question for Dirk? For Dirk, okay. Please go, Kenya.
So, what I hear the Secretariat saying, the decision that we made did not include GCF. When we are discussing on modalities for implementation, and particularly this session, it doesn't cover GCF. So we will need another arrangement to engage with GCF.
Yeah. I think the Koronivia joint work is really open to everyone to work together with parties, all observers and all stakeholders. What is very specific for this workshop is that the mandate says workshop with constituted bodies, and that does not include the GCF.
Okay, thank you, Dirk. We will go now with Thailand, please.
Thank you once again, co-facilitator. Just very briefly on number one, how could the constituted bodies be further involved? I'm thinking of building upon submissions of by the parties, and so in there it was clearly defined how could what are their requests through the submissions. And on number two is on the modalities. I think of regional groupings here so that the impact will be scaled up. And so I may give an example, the ASEAN group. They are trying to build upon a common position on the real need of the region. And also exploring sub-regional platforms for knowledge exchange platforms would be also relevant. And on the third one, future topics may be, now we are working on CSA practices, country profiles for climate smart practices. And we are now moving towards packaging of technologies that is to enhance resilience in the ASEAN region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thailand. So now, based on Kenya's intervention, we will give the floor to the GCF. Please could you introduce yourself and give us maybe some examples of the work you're doing with the constituted bodies too. Thank you.
Thank you very much for offering this opportunity for us to clarify a few things. And my name is Li Feng Li. I am the coordinator of support programs, which include the readiness, the NARP, the PPF, and also the safeguards work. Regarding the works of agriculture, probably you noticed that GCF has 8 result areas. And certainly the result area of water security, food security, and livelihood of the people, they all touch upon the issues of agriculture. And increasingly, agriculture has been an area that we receive much more requests from the parties. If you look at our current project portfolio, probably we have a portfolio of about $700 million that's contributed to the agriculture. Secondly, National Adaptation Planning, NARP, is one of the mandates that we received from the COP, from the parties. And with our support at the moment, we have endorsed 30 NARP grant, which is about 8 million. And also, in addition to that, in our project pipeline on the NARPs, we have about 100 million that we work very hard to work with the delivery partners, but also the countries to provide further support to their NARP in the future. Thirdly, GCF looks forward to the COP guidance, and also we stand by ready to support any needed actions that's requested by the countries. As you know, GCF is operated under the country drivenness and the country ownership. So we would like to contribute to any actions that's mentioned or suggested at the COP, and also in the collaboration with some partners that's mentioned here already, like LAG, like Adaptation Committee, FAO, UNDP. We are also look at the opportunities to collaborate with them in the future and to organize further the training workshops, capacity building activities that will also help the countries to share the experience, share the lessons, share the techniques in terms of the agriculture and also national adaptation planning. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask if any country has a question for the GCF, considering, don't go, considering we have the presence of the GCF here. I don't know if any country has any question related to what was presented right now. Kenya?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks GCF for your flexibility. Even though you are being thrown out, we welcome you to the family. Yeah, the question I wanted to find out is this, that since agriculture is so important, and as you know from the Paris Agreement, it is both in the preamble, but also in the purpose, which is Article 2, and primarily Article 2(1)(b), which is very critical. Are there plans within the GCF to give special consideration to agriculture, given that you have done similar for RED, for example? Recently, you got RED 500 million to catalyze activity there. Given that agriculture and its centrality and its importance, is that something that we can engage the board with to see if they can give that kind of consideration to agriculture?
Thank you, Kenya. Is there any other question from parties or observers to the GCF? You? EU.
Thank you. Well, to follow on, if I understood correctly, George's question, so is there any constitution or anybody in the GCF board that is interested or heavily interested in agriculture at the moment? I mean, on the board you have representatives from different countries, as far as I know, and then some observers. But is there any constituency that would represent farmers at the moment? Yeah.
EU. Uganda has a question for GCF and Philippines too. Is that correct? Okay, so please, Uganda, followed by the Philippines.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I would like to appreciate the presentation by the GCF. And also, in view of our discussion today, I think it would be very helpful to know to what extent GCF is actually rendering support to the constituent bodies, other constituent bodies that especially those that presented this morning. It would be very useful to know if GF has actually provided support, GCF, sorry, has provided such support, and to which of them. And this would be very useful for us to know how to actually also engage and also see the role of GCF in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Uganda. Now the Philippines, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Co-Facilitator. My intervention is related to my colleague from Uganda. To the GCF, earlier the CBs presented their respective activities that are related to agriculture or the Koronivia. We would like to ask whether the GCF provided some support to these CBs or can provide support, since we're talking about parties earlier talk about trying to scale up some of these activities, and for the Philippines, we're trying to scale up the climate resilient agriculture technologies, and we're looking forward to accessing the GCF funds. And relative also to the output of the CVs, we also would like to request that the concerned CVs open, provide the documentations of the respective activities that were mentioned earlier, so that parties can also look into how this the possibility of scaling up these projects in the respective locations. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippines. If there are no any other questions for the GCF, please, you can address the questions now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will try my best to address the issues raised by the parties. Firstly, regarding a special window on agriculture, I think given the current operation, agriculture is one of the focus of the GCF, and we fully support the parties, the countries to put forward a proposal in the agriculture area. However, we could also consider a funding window run through a different, like a call for proposals that has been used for other areas. We could also make the proposal for the board to discuss whether there is need to launch a new, this kind of a funding window. That's up to the board to decide. Regarding the presentation in the board of the GCF, probably you know the board of GCF consists of 24 members, and half of them are from the developing constituency, half of them are from the developed constituency. So we don't have the board members to represent any groups, either it's on the agriculture issues or on the other issues. So it's not the current modality. Regarding the support of climate resilient agriculture and how the GCF can provide further support, probably I think there's a few opportunities or few channels we could provide support. The first one is through the Readiness program. The Readiness program is really focused on the capacity building of the parties. That covers both the capacity regarding the countries to have the ability to understand the operations of GCF, and also the capacity to be able to develop projects that could be funded by the GCF, but also by the other climate finance. So that's largely about the accessing the climate finance. The second, under the readiness, we also increasing our investment to help the countries to building their technical capacities and agriculture, water, or climate rationale. You know, all these issues are the issues that has been raised by the parties that we are looking forward to develop the next phase of the readiness program, so that GCF will be able to really to develop some tailor-made effort that support the countries to build their capacity in those related areas. In fact, tomorrow during the 11 to 12 o'clock at the GCF Pavilion, we will also share some of the ideas regarding the readiness program in the future. And we warmly welcome all the parties to join us to help us to think through what kind of capacity is needed and how GCF can help you in this regard. Thirdly, we also provide the PPF support, project preparation facility, which is helping the countries to develop their project that could be funded by the GCF. We fully understand many countries, they are facing the capacity challenge in terms of develop those project concept notes or project proposals. We have this PPF available that could be used by the countries. And then thirdly, it's go through the GCF funding proposal process, and that's that's the third window, and that's the largest window in terms of GCF support to the countries. I hope I addressed all the questions raised by the parties, but also we stand by if you want to discuss much more in details. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming in on last minute. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so now we will continue with comments from two observer organizations. If you could please introduce yourself and give your comments. Thank you.
Hello, I am Emily. I am speaking on behalf of the Agriculture Working Group from the Youth constituency, Django. We would like to take this opportunity to share our thoughts on the first two questions. First of all, we would like to acknowledge that the knowledge sharing aspect of these workshops. It allows all of us to engage better with this process. We have a lot of hope that constituted bodies will be able to support and contribute to the implementation of Koronivia work. We recommend that the workshops result in a clear series. We recommend that the workshops result on a clear series of guidelines for constituted bodies, so that they can lead to concrete work on the ground. These guidelines should target the sharing of knowledge, capacity building with farmers, market information accessible to all farmers, and access to finance. The implementation of these guidelines, as other outcomes from the workshops, should be collaborative, participatory, and inclusive. We also hope that the clear channel of communications will be implemented between constituted bodies and civil society, along with parties. We support the fact that these guidelines and outcomes will have a place potentially in the NDCs and the transparency framework. In this regard, we urge agriculture negotiators to work closely with their teams to emphasize the place and role of food security in the Paris Rulebook, as well as the Great 8 guiding principles of the Paris Agreement, so that Koronivia future work can be fed in at this level. Secondly, and lastly, we would like to raise our concerns regarding the place of youth and civil society in this workshop and the upcoming workshops. We would like to emphasize that the unique perspective of young people make us key stakeholders in this space, that thus our expertise should be valued. Indeed, during the open submission period, we submitted our own recommendations as requested for the topic 2.8, modalities for the implementation of the outcomes of the 5 in-session workshops. This can be found in the UNFCCC submissions portal. We hope they are genuinely considered by parties and bodies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yango. Please.
Dear delegates, participants and colleagues, I do not want to make a statement, but I would like to draw your attention on major points included in a submission of a group of research and higher education institutions and programs, observers and non-observers to the UNFCCC and the Koronivia joint work on agriculture, on modalities for implementation of the outcomes of the 5 in-session workshops, on issues related to agriculture and other future topics that may arise from this work, namely question 2 and 3. We would like to stress the importance of knowledge-based actions, programs, and public policies in the area of climate change and agriculture. And at this point, I am very happy to share with you some good news for this conference of the parties and for the Koronivia process. Indeed, the scientific community is already deeply committed to accompany action and very active in the generation of knowledge and expertise to inform action in the area of agriculture and climate change. Moreover, it is currently partly organized and structured to support and accompany public policies and initiatives of all actors at scale, as well as to pilot and monitor regional and national efforts to enhance carbon sequestration in soils in ongoing soil and land restoration initiatives. In addition to its contribution to IPCC, The scientific community is engaged in numerous activities and initiatives with respect to Koronivia-related topics, in particular to support action to strengthen food security, mitigate, and adapt to climate change. Indeed, the group of signatories includes national institutions in Africa, Senegal, and Madagascar, Brazil, Europe, France, Poland, and Spain, the European Joint Research Center, the World Soil Information, EASA, taking part to major regional initiatives and international initiatives involved in strengthening the coordination and the structure of research and scientific cooperation in agriculture and climate change, and inter alia, in the CGIA research programs on climate change, agriculture and food security, and on water, land, and ecosystems, the Global Research Alliance on Agricultural Greenhouse Gases, the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification Science Policy Interface, the 4 Soils for Food Security and Climate Initiative, and the coordination of international research cooperation on soil carbon sequestration, CIRCASA, supported by the European Union. Therefore, in order to build robust evidence-based solutions to adapt to and mitigate climate change in the agriculture sector and to increase food security, we believe that the participation of the scientific community in the Koronivia Joint Work Programme on Agriculture will be key for its success, and that participation of relevant scientific and technical experts in this program should be ensured. We also propose that for each workshop, complementarities and synergies between actions for food security, adaptation to and mitigation of climate change are considered as essential. They are currently already addressed by scientists at the global scale. In addition, noting that the Koronivia program will take into consideration the vulnerabilities in agriculture to climate change and approaches to address food security, we consider that the links between food security and the specific topics dealt with in each workshop should be addressed explicitly. Moreover, for the last workshop on socioeconomic and food security dimensions of climate change in the agricultural sector, further dimensions related to poverty, gender, and health should also be considered. We do also think that it is important to link the topics of the different workshops. Indeed, they refer to different sustainable development goals, inter alia but not restricted to SDG 2, 13, and 15, that cannot be pursued separately. In addition, to accompany action and implement knowledge-based solutions in the field, it is crucial that the solutions proposed are adapted to each local context. Therefore, it is important that both global and local case studies are part of each workshop. For that purpose, experts could propose meta-analysis, review of meta-analysis and local case studies. They may also propose recommendations or options for making progress, which should be taken up in the report of the UNFCCC Secretariat and be discussed at the second SB session. To inform the efficiency of the science-society interface, scientists are already engaged in dialogues with several actors. But moreover, and in order to improve the efficiency of the science policy interface, we consider that it would be extremely useful to organize a procedure under the UNFCCC framework to first collect information on the research needs of parties, as well on processes and modalities, structuring national interface.
Thank you. We have a long line of observers wanting to also present, so I would like to recommend that we have in consideration this also, because the idea is also not only for parties, but as well as for observer organizations. But thank you for your comments and suggestions. We will go now again to parties, and then we will come back to observer organizations. So EU, please.
Thank you. Well, I will be very short, and I have nothing against hearing more of the observer organizations. We just, if that's okay, we just wanted to try to shortly answer your question too, because that was your request in the beginning. So for the EU modalities that would be useful would be simply first to write down any recommendations that come out of the group discussions that are linked to the report and to the workshop we had today, and then identify the corresponding constituted body where we think that this message should go. And that would be a simple first step. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, EU. South Africa raised its flag or no? No? Yeah? No? Yeah. Okay, so we go with Japan, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So we're going to the first two questions. Is that okay? The first two, going back to the first two questions. Okay, thank you. Japan agrees with many observations made by previous speakers that this Koronivia work and the constituted bodies should sort of have a both direction dialogue. And Japan specifically supports the proposal made by Uruguay that a sort of mapping should be done with regards to which constituted bodies does which modalities. And in doing so, I'm wondering if it might be useful also to include the Green Climate Fund, even though they are not the constituted bodies. We learned that they have a lot of relevant work in relation to the Koronivia work and also the willingness to support us. And by doing this mapping exercise, I would also like to highlight that such mapping would also, I mean, such mapping would, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the second question specifically. Which modalities would be useful for the implementation? Probably largely depends on each situation, so the answer is not one size fits all. But by developing such mapping, which would be useful for parties to select which modality is best suit their specific situation. And by doing this mapping, not only parties, but also our important partners, including FAO and NGOs, they would also find such mapping useful. That's my proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Japan, and thank you for reminding us we are still answering questions 1 and 2. So we'll go now with Uruguay.
Thank you very much. So first of all, I want to clarify regarding the question of Kenya that I'm speaking on behalf of Uruguay. So not in the name of G77, even though we have very similar views, or at least with respect of what you said. So regarding actually the third question, but it's very related to the first other two, we believe that first of all, we have to implement the outcomes of these 5 workshops. So we propose that based on the reports by the Secretariat on the outcomes of the previous 5 workshops, Koronivia should first, and in line of what Japan said, identify and characterize what are the constituted bodies doing already in relation to the different topics already addressed. Then, in the second place, assess the gaps between these actions and the actual needs of the parties. And in the third place, to prepare a draft COP decision containing guidance to the CBs on the ways to fill these gaps already identified and increase support and mobilize resources to developing country parties for the implementation of actions related to the relevant topics of the 5 workshops. Thank you.
Thank you, Uruguay, for moving us forward and answering the third question. I would like to propose now receiving 2 other observer organizations, and if parties that have not taken the floor, if they have any views on questions 1 and 2, please do so. If not, please, any party that has the answers, we will be moving to question number 3. Please, observer organizations, and present yourself, please. Thank you.
Thank you, delegates, co-facilitators, constituted bodies, and my fellow observers for the opportunity to make an intervention today. Really appreciate that. I'm speaking on behalf of a coalition of NGOs that includes Environmental Defense Fund, National Wildlife Federation, Conservation International, Carbon 180, the Nature Conservancy, and several others. I'll be brief. First, we want to congratulate the parties today on taking this first critical step on the Koronivia roadmap process. The importance of this effort cannot be overstated. And the process itself represents the efforts of many individuals, some of whom are no longer with us in this process. So we would first like to acknowledge that history and honor those contributions while looking ahead to make this process a success. Today we heard from the constituted bodies, and we heard positive interventions from many of the parties. This is a good start, and we've covered a wide range of topics today. Nevertheless, we urge parties to be mindful of the urgency of this work. We have listened closely to the interventions today, and we would like to note 3 issues that still need more attention. First, related to the role of the constituted bodies. We were encouraged by the amount of work already underway among these bodies. However, we noted a gap between the requests from many parties to provide information relevant to stakeholders on the ground and the relatively high-level approach taken by most of these constituted bodies. Such high-level work is definitely necessary, and in some cases we heard that it's actually a requirement in their mandate of these bodies. Therefore, we continue to see a need for the upcoming discussions of the Koronivia joint work to find ways to bridge this gap between the global context and the local context. Second, relating to modalities, we heard a few examples of activities that build on deep stakeholder participation at the community level and incorporate indigenous knowledge, but unfortunately these examples are still too uncommon. To maximize the effectiveness of this process, we need to maximize the transparency and inclusiveness of what we are doing here. And to our mind, that means including a broader representation of stakeholders, most importantly, farmers. I suspect we may hear from one shortly. We further encourage this process to take greater advantage of the expertise and relationships among civil society groups, especially those with an understanding of those local contexts. Third, in relation to the future topics, we just want to reiterate something we've said in past submissions around the importance of discussing safeguards, looking ahead toward the topic in the roadmap of socioeconomic and food security dimensions of climate change. We don't want that topic to be forgotten, but to be continued to be addressed along the way. So once again, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to speak today, and we look forward to contributing to the success of the Koronivia agenda. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Fred Yoder. I serve as the chairman of the North American Climate Smart Agriculture. That is the regional part of the Global Alliance of Climate Smart Agriculture. I just must say I've been to many COP meetings over the years, and I am thrilled that agriculture is finally getting the recognition that it needs to get as a possible solution to climate change. And I'm just really, really thrilled that we're having this workshop. One of the things I'd like to address is mainly number 2, modalities. I really wish, and it was mentioned by the good gentleman from Uganda, climate smart agriculture. You know, we live by those 3 pillars, and it's really effective. The number 1 pillar is productivity and profitability. Farmers still have to feed the world, and we got to do this at the same time as we reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So that's the number 1 pillar. The number 2 pillar is adaptation and soil resilience. Farmers are right now, markets are down, and we need to figure out ways to minimize our risk by making our soils more productive and understanding what's happening below the surface as much as what's on top. So that's the number 2 pillar. The number 3 pillar is, of course, reduction of greenhouse gas. And there's 2 ways you can do that. You can do that by reducing your trips over the field, but also sequestering carbon by not stirring the soil and having those crops end up being like a giant solar panel to pull that carbon dioxide and leave it in the soil. The main thing I want to talk about is this is going to be a systems approach. In our NACs at work at home, we involve farmers, academia, ag business folks, forestry people, and NGOs like was mentioned that really believe and understand what farming is all about. And those that were listed are very, very important to us in their work with us. It has to be a systems approach. You can't just go after greenhouse gas reduction without understanding how it affects productivity. And the other thing is we can, in this group, we can come up with the best plan there is, that we think it is, but if farmers don't buy into it, it's dead on arrival. So I would really encourage us as far as the modalities, think about adapting and adopting those 3 pillars of climate smart agriculture, but also make sure that farmers have a seat at the table to make sure that this is going to be very successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the observer organization's comments and suggestions and for sticking to time. Are there any parties interested? Okay. Please, UNFCCC.
Thank you very much and for the opportunity to be here. My name is Baron Orr and I'm the lead scientist for the UNFCCC, and I'd like to follow on both in terms of presentations and comments from the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, the synergies discussion between FAO and Kenya, and the comments made by Japan and Uruguay. The UNFCCC embraces the synergistic approach, and all of our efforts now are based on multiple benefits through land degradation neutrality. And I would like to encourage this body to consider that as a basis for trying to bring together the synergies that were talked about before. The entry points are many and wide open to that. They emphasize soil organic carbon, value chains, systems approach, and landscape approach, things that have been raised frequently in the discussions today. So I leave that door open, and I look forward to the possibility of such collaboration among both country parties and the organizations mentioned.
Thank you very much, and for presenting collaboration on these issues too. I would like to ask parties if there is any other comment or suggestion, or if you want to answer now question 3, which some parties have already done. Okay, do we have more observers? Yes? Okay, please.
Yes, hello, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm a farmer from the county of Yorkshire in England, and I very much agree with the previous farmer from the United States and his views. I think it's extremely important that agriculture features very heavily in the climate change discussion. And we need to move from being seen as a lot of the problem and see that the solutions lie in agriculture as well. I also am affected by climate change, have been for many years, so I get it firsthand. But I also appreciate that there are many parts of the world where it is considerably more serious than the impacts that I see. We can't act quick enough. I'd like to share some of our constituencies' brief initial reflections. Like others, we would welcome a continued and continual two-way exchange between this Koronivia work
and the constituted bodies to enhance coherence and avoid duplication. We hope that this encourages the bodies to further consider agriculture in the breadth of their work. We hope that this might also inspire the financial instruments of the Convention, in particular the Green Climate Fund, to include agriculture and facilitate that our community is also represented amongst its accredited entities. We know that successful implementation will eventually require many stakeholders, including governments, but I was especially glad to hear that whatever happens has to reach farmers. And as a farmer and a member of a farmers' organization, I put us all at your disposal to facilitate such an exchange. And it has to be an exchange because our expertise and knowledge will be critical in ensuring that solutions are practical for all farmers on the ground, especially women farmers and young farmers, and can be implemented in a real-life farm situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Anne-Laure Sablé and I speak on behalf of Climate Action Network. This first workshop has provided insights into the gaps and linkages around agriculture and climate change. Drawing from these insights, Climate Action Network emphasizes the importance of having guiding principles or criteria that should drive the discussions to ensure that the outcomes of this work really do meet the needs of farmers, food systems, and our planet's climate. Koronivia workshops must have a balanced representation of expertise and knowledge. This should include the active participation and presentations by observers, in particular peasants' movements, NGOs, the Indigenous Peoples Caucus, and the gender constituency, who have significant and relevant expertise to share with the process. The Koronivia should be mindful of and draw of the current SBI process to develop criteria for the avoidance of conflict of interest, particularly when inviting presenters and views for the workshops. The Koronivia work should be framed under the 4 pillars of food security as defined by the Committee on World Food Security and FAO, as mentioned also earlier by FAO. Parties must be guided by the objective of equitable absolute emission reduction. This means that reduced intensity or increased efficiency per kilo of food is not an acceptable objective by itself, as it can often create perverse incentives to increase production and increase total emissions. Koronivia presentations and discussion should reflect on and direct work towards holistic efforts, including the progressive transition towards agroecology to ensure the long-term viability of agricultural and food systems within the natural world that they depend upon. The Koronivia must make a particular effort to mainstream awareness of and strategies for gender responsiveness and equity throughout all elements of the work. Furthermore, to guarantee effective and inclusive work under the Koronivia, we believe that a substantive time should be dedicated to the workshops during the substa sessions. These important discussions must be hosted within legitimate United Nations spaces and events, rather than outside additional workshops where participation could be limited. We welcome parties' contribution to funding specific workshops outlined in the Koronivia roadmap. However, these contributions should not be conditional on hosting the workshops in donors' country. Such a practice has the potential to raise questions about conflict of interest that could undermine the legitimacy of this body. We believe that the best, most neutral and legitimate space to hold these workshops are in UNFCCC spaces, organized by the Secretariat and during substa sessions. Finally, we would like to share our commiserations with colleagues, particularly those from Malawi, the Africa Group, the LDCs, and the G77 at the loss this year of Fred Kossam of Malawi. Fred has been negotiating on agriculture for many years, and he was an active member of the Koronivia agriculture family. So along with many of you, we will raise a glass tonight and hope that the work ahead delivers real solutions for the world's most vulnerable farmers, for whom Fred has been a strong advocate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments and your words. I would like to give the floor to FAO.
Thank you. And thanks for remembering Fred. And just to say that we dedicated this publication to the memory of Fred because he was really behind the Koronivia. And just to flag another point that as I presented in my presentation, we did analysis of the submission, and we are doing the same exercise for the submission for that topic. So please, if you want, we have already a first draft for comment. So we are already synthesizing from submission from 11 submission by parties and 13 by observers. For the moment, the cut date was 19th of November. In the next round, we will include more submission. But if you want to review already the first draft, please get into contact with me or my colleague Julia Wolf, if you know her, and we will provide you the link or the necessary material to have your comment. Thank you.
Thank you, FAO. I would like to know if there are any other comments or suggestions from the parties. Okay, so I would like to check how many observer organizations we have. We have around 15 minutes. Two more? No other observer organization or any other organization? Okay, so we go with the observer organizations. Thank you. Sorry, Kenya, please.
Yeah, I hope you're going to create some time for the next action after this, because otherwise we don't want to finish the time and then we don't discuss what next steps after today's meeting.
Thank you, Kenya, for your point of order. We would discuss this issue after the two comments from observer organizations. Thank you. Please.
Thank you. I'm Jonas, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Agriculture Working Group from the Youth Constituency, Yangon. We would like to share 3 points we think will be key in the transformation of agriculture for the adaptation and mitigation, as well as for food security. First of all, we think it is needed to promote a plant-based diet instead of an animal-based diet. This would allow to reduce emissions, particularly methane. We would need to keep in mind the principles of just transition for farmers and workers, and using culturally appropriate approaches. Our second point is linked to the promotion of efficient agricultural system based on a big number of small-scale farms, using efficient farming techniques such as agroecology and permaculture to minimize high-energy inputs and technology. Third, we think it is important to tackle issues related to the whole food chain, not only agriculture. For example, by reducing food waste and loss at all levels of production and consumption. A transversal concern that we should keep in mind is to maintain farmers' autonomy, and solutions that will be put forward, especially technological solutions, should not threaten this autonomy. This is also a reason to favor agroecological solutions over solutions promoted by agribusiness. Dear colleagues, dear delegates, we reiterate our request that we will be able to keep open channels of communication and participation between youth from civil society and delegates throughout all Koronivia joint work on agriculture, during and between workshops. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. This is Tobias Bedeker from the World Bank. I'm going to try to touch on a couple of the issues we raised in our submission that we did jointly with the CGIAR CCAFs. But first of all, I wanted to say that I'm very excited to be here and for this meeting to be taking place, like many others have noted. I think I want to echo my colleague from the UNCCD in really saying that though we should be mindful of the urgency in this whole debate, that the most important thing is to find a way forward. at this stage because we're running out of time. And to achieve that, I would like to, before that, I would like to also express that it's very good to hear that there is already some coalescing of views among the parties happening on how this way forward might look like. And I really want to encourage to try to bring this discussion to some conclusion quickly so that we can then actually take this way forward. We were very happy to hear that extra time has been made available on Wednesday. So the key would be, I think, in this discussion now about next steps, to try to be strategic about how you tackle this topic of implementation arrangements. What does it mean to be strategic here? I would say you should try to focus the discussion on those bodies and organizations that have the capacity to affect real change on the ground. And that should, as we have said in our submission, that should be within as well as outside the convention and very much including the GCF. There's one elephant in the room that I would like to highlight also, is that governments are already supporting agriculture around the world every year at an amount of about $570 billion US, which they give to agriculture producers as well as in the form of price support. This is a very large amount of resources compared to most other resources that we're discussing. So finding a way to redirect some of these to achieve better climate outcomes could be a very big impact item that doesn't require new resources and could further have other additional side benefits. At the World Bank, we are beginning to engage on a broader work program on this issue, and if you are interested, please come to find me and we can find a way to work on this together. And finally, to echo something that a colleague from the Philippines had said, they mentioned this CSA profiles process, which we together with CIAT and CICAFs in different countries have now created climate smart agriculture profiles in over 30 countries. They summarize the context and some of the most prominent or important solution options based on the opinions of local experts for, as I said, 30 countries. And we have pulled all this data together to try to derive some insights about what CSA is based on this, if you like, survey that we've conducted around the world. And there are some very interesting messages that emanate in a report that we're going to launch this Wednesday at 4:45 p.m. In the Pianini room. I'm not sure if I said this correctly. But one of the things, and with that I wanted to disclose, one of the things that came out was that for every country, for 30 countries in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, we rated different technologies according to a set of 7 or 8 criteria that you can group into criteria mainly relating to productivity, mainly relating to resilience, or mainly relating to mitigation. And we looked at how often do you find that that ratings go in different directions. How many technologies have a negative rating in one of these 3 dimensions and positive ratings in the other, and so on. And we found that this is a very, very small minority of technologies. So there are trade-offs, particularly at system level. There are complex issues around climate and agriculture, no doubt. But by and large, the vast majority of the technologies that experts discuss when they discuss climate smart agriculture actually have benefits quite broadly across the board. So we should not get too hung up on this phantom discussion or other similar phantom discussions and try to focus more on what we agree on and how we can move forward to keep feeding the world and address the big issues that we have. Over.
Thank you, Yongo and the World Bank. Now I would like to go back to Kenya's question related to next steps. As I understand, the Secretariat will prepare a report for consideration of the next session based on what we have been discussing during this day, this whole day of meeting of the workshop, and that we will be meeting for an informal consultation on Wednesday at noon. But I wanted to ask Kenya if you have any additional issue that you think we should address or any next steps that you had envisioned to, so that everybody or all the parties can also consider. Please, Kenya.
Yeah, thank you, co-facilitator. I think that's useful. That's all I wanted. But from the co-facilitator's point of view, what do you expect us to be doing on Wednesday? Are we going to engage now based on the discussions we've had here to see how we can crystallize and get some common elements that we can move forward for maybe the May session, or what are we going to do on Wednesday? Just preparing as a procedural conclusion, or what should we be looking forward to?
Thank you, Kenya. As we understand, we have limited amount of time during this week, and our work has to be done and finished for this week. If I understood correctly, it's on Saturday or Friday that we have to finish, so that Saturday it can go to the SBI plenaries. So this is something to consider, that we have limited amount of time. Based also on your question, I would say that many issues have been discussed during this day, and many of them are part of the mandate that we have also during this session and during the roadmap that we discussed and agreed in our intersessionals in Bonn. So that is something to consider as well. If you would like to, what would you envision that we have at the end of this week? And this is something that parties have to maybe reflect on, considering all the discussions and the comments and the suggestions that you, as well as observers, have discussed during this session, during this whole day session. But I would like to give also the floor to my co-facilitator, so he can walk us also on his vision and what we can work on during this week. Thank you.
Thank you, Milagros. And actually, you said almost everything that I also thought that as I said in the end of the morning session, I think there was such a wealth of information that it may be that we may need to a little bit of digest that in what could be sort of captured as a concrete steps. That's the first element. The second one is that I think both SBI and SAPTA chair has very strictly instructed us that we have very limited time because the focus is on the Paris Agreement. And as Milagros was saying, we need to conclude by Friday. We are in your hands, and of course we are looking for at least to having positive conclusions. Maybe if I may allow, I think that to me today has demonstrated that the Koronivia work is very well on track. And I think that could be maybe an element that we may address. The standards or the practices and the conclusions is to praise the submissions by the parties and observers, excellent inputs from the constituted bodies, etc., etc. The question is that whether there could be one or two concrete steps that could follow already here that could accelerate the work, Koronivia joint work that we already have agreed. Maybe that could be something for you to consider. It seems always to be better that we have agreement on something useful that we all believe is good to move forward, and then we let the ball rolling. And my understanding is that in the next session in June there would be another workshops, but also maybe more better time to reflect on all the information and views that you have expressed here. But maybe if you allow, Milagros, I think it would be also very useful that you talk to each other tomorrow, because it might be that if you're able to develop some ideas how to move forward, we are in your hands, and that would be something for you to explore by yourselves. That would be my sort of views, Milagros, at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Heike. I don't know if anybody wants to reflect on what was said now. I would encourage, as Heike mentioned, that you can meet tomorrow and discuss maybe in the corridors what do you envision you would like to conclude in this session, and be able to discuss that between parties. And also, I think that these 3 questions that the Secretariat proposed are interesting for you to guide your discussions tomorrow, and that maybe during the informal consultation that we have on Wednesday at noon, you can present some of those discussions, or you can tell us the way forward. As Heike mentioned, we are in your hands. So it depends on you. This is a party process, so it depends on you what you want or what you envision that we can have here at this COP. And definitely that is something that you will have to agree together. I don't know if there's any reflection on this way forward from parties. Okay. So let's try to conclude this session, this workshop. I think we have heard the work of 8 constituted bodies, 4 examples from countries and organizations working on agriculture issues with constituted bodies, as well as a brief presentation on GCF and the UNCCD about the work that they are doing and how they can also collaborate with this Koronivia work. We have had the opportunity to understand the mandate of the constituted bodies and how they are implementing their mandate. This is very important because they have tried to give us clear linkages of how this work can relate to the Koronivia work. So the constituted bodies, they have also indicated that how their work is related to agriculture, and they are open to working together in a coherent manner in the future. And how to make, I would just suggest that, and my personal view is that we have identified existing processes, and it is important of how to understand how to make use of these existing processes during the discussions that you have as parties to avoid duplication. And we need to discuss practical ways to move forward the Koronivia mandate. So based on that, I would just like to congratulate you for this important workshop that we've had all this day. I think many of we have all been engaged in the discussions and the work that many of the constituted bodies have presented during this day. I would thank you all for your contributions during this day of work, especially also not only parties, but observer organizations. With this, we would like to conclude the workshop. Again, thanks for your participation. It is always a pleasure to facilitate these discussions, and thank you also Heike, for your support on this and the Secretariat. As I mentioned, a formal report will be published by the Secretariat before the next SB. We look forward to seeing you again in our informal consultations on Wednesday at 12 in meeting room 2, okay? But please consult the CCTV for any changes. As you know, sometimes things change quite rapidly. Thank you again for all your work today. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.